his talk, The Importance of Sharing Open Data Using FAIR and CARE, considers the ways of making data open in the digital age and what this means for researchers who represent the Academy. Some key concepts are introduced on the impact of open research and the role that open data plays, as well as the evolving use of FAIR and CARE principles and how they can function in the research landscape. I'm handing over to Pádraig. Off you go.
Okay, so thanks very much, Donna, and thank you all for coming along today. I'll just share my screen. And I'd like to start off by saying that my talk today will be very much based in the humanities. As a person who was in digital humanities over the years, I'm sort of interdisciplinary scholar, but also I'm a data steward as my current role in UCC. And also, I'd just like to really talk about this evolving landscape because, you know, we've seen it grow from the very early days of FAIR and before that as well. So it's interesting to see it as an evolving landscape, and I'd love to hear your thoughts at the end of it. Okay, so sharing itself, sharing data or sharing research coexists with the scholarly primitives as a foundational aspect of digital humanities and cultural heritage. For example, best practice digitization, representation, dissemination, and preservation of any cultural object necessitate working in interdisciplinary teams as co-equal generators of knowledge work. So the sharing understanding, shared outputs, and transparency are goals that those in digital humanities especially aspire to. In the gallery, library, archive, and museum sectors, the wide range of scholarly input comes from spectral engineers, spatial engineers, color scientists, sound engineers, art historians, conservators, information scientists, and all manner of subject matter experts, ensuring that they must contribute to how objects are realized on the public's many devices, especially where funding for projects comes from the public purse. It's now attendant upon us as a society that contemporary research cultures must move beyond traditional museological confines to encompass and serve intangible heritages and communities where research originated. And this should reside as integral to a shared, inclusive future, as pointed out in the CARE principles in 2021. A profoundly intersectional cultural heritage for research areas such as the digital humanities is one that challenges the canonical acceptance of previous paradigms, the hierarchies, the elites, and the centres. Such a mode combines CARE principles, which are collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics, with FAIR principles, which are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, to repudiate the power differentials and historical contexts and encourage open and other data movements to consider both people and purpose in their advocacy and pursuit. Reframed then as a complement to CARE, the FAIR principles, when extended into the people and purpose-oriented visioning of CARE, become more meaningful for communities outside of the Academy. Central to this research agenda is the person and not just the data. And scholars seeking to share cultural heritage must continue to place an increasing amount of focus on connecting more meaningfully with communities where artifacts originate. With music collections, for example, renewed efforts are being made to avoid the ethical tensions about ownership, responsibilities, and the benefits of collected material, but also to improve upon some problematic interactions that arose between collectors and communities in the past. Scholars such as Deirdre Keneally here in Ireland in 2021 describe ways to become more balanced in sharing, to disrupt the dynamics of power, while others recognise the imperative for professionals to rely upon relationships with the communities that have already got procedures for dealing with their cultural materials, and especially ones that are transferred from cultural institutions. And see Reid 2019 for that. So such shifts then, coupled with the slow but steady move towards open publishing, are bringing about truly community-led approaches to knowledge sharing. As a result, a more engaged attitude to sharing can allow scholars to infuse their research with the needs and expectations of the communities who their materials represent. Community-led approaches to research are in many ways generous, but there's tension between the ideals of generous thinking from Fitzpatrick and the often not so generous demands of the Academy for researchers to pursue as solo and siloed works of scholarship. So nowhere is such tension more apparent than in how scholars are expected to share in print, in monographs, with prestige publishers rather than openly. Crossing over into the open publishing side, let's say, of a researcher's career, it's easy to see how data can be deprioritized. The issues that are found in sharing print have also been seen in tangible and intangible cultural heritage work. This occurred initially because of cost, and later then due to infrastructural and sustainability concerns surrounding data and code, and concerns that are evident with many other digital humanities projects. So scholars such as Mark Sample in the digital humanities argue the opportunity presented by the digital is in how it transforms how we share. We're no longer bound by the physical demands of printed books, paper journals. We're no longer constrained by production costs and distribution friction. We're no longer hampered by the top-down and unsustainable business models of the past. People like Sample's visions for places like digital humanities is one where knowledge building and sharing are one and the same. Simply put, we should build knowledge together. Others agree, such as Gold, who says we should no longer be content to make our work public and achingly slowly along ingrained routes, authors and readers alike delayed by innumerable gateways limiting knowledge production and sharing. A variety of digital humanities projects have reconsidered some of our old ways of sharing, and thus seeing cultural heritage publishing full-colour plates of, let's say, Blake taking 3D scans of manuscript pages, working with galleries, libraries, archives, and museums to make our understanding of a great many artworks more accessible. Cultural heritage institutions were amongst the first to share photographic archives, ephemera, and sound, but the primacy of print modes delayed the onset of the integration of cultural heritage with the digital humanities more broadly. And where scholars wrote about songs, they did not hear the music from the printed page, nor had they a sense of the sculptor's volume when shown a single flat image intended to illustrate a written point. Cultural heritage encounters in digital humanities move beyond the page, allowing interactive experiences that are far less limited. So why FAIR? Cultural heritage operates in a scholarly space that's at the interface of disciplinary cultures that don't often share the same language but must acquire a lingua franca to work together. FAIR is an acronym, of course, for the activities making data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable in a data-centric fashion. FAIR is not just a policy piece from a funding body. The very activity of doing FAIR provides for advocacy and a framework for scholarly spaces, in particular, those that are the interface of disciplinary cultures, because it advocates that research models prioritize open practices for the benefit of all. So we see standards-based approaches like the International Image Interoperability Framework, or IIIF, exemplifying these ideals to exhort us to break down silos with things such as open APIs. In Europe, open access has become integral, of course, to funding success, not just in terms of the publication of traditional papers, articles, and books, but in terms of the research data and the digital objects at the core of the work. Other activities supporting the breakdown of silos from different angles. Sample, I go back to again, has called for a similar ethos to be adopted in digital humanities, where instead of just writing, classrooms will be filled with students who are both making and sharing with each other and the world outside the academy. From this perspective then of the university lecturer, Sample actually saw this as a critical intervention into the enclosed experience that most students have in our higher education. It cuts to the very fundamentals of education as well. How do we share our knowledge from the start? In this type of digital humanities, opening research to communities outside the academy becomes less of a perceived nod to the outreach activity for a common good, but instead it initiates a more engaged commitment to truly sharing research, building openness to research publication from the outset. Unfortunately, there's still a long way to go before scholarship in digital humanities and across the academy becomes truly open and engaged. Sharing culture needs to also be sustainable. How many digital projects can guarantee sustainability beyond 5 years? In terms of time and effort, what is the return on investment for the scholar in engaging with digital potentialities for their research beyond the traditional focus and methodology? When the work is complete, where will it reside? How long will it be accessible? If software such as Sketchfab closes, where will the 3D models live? The perceived impermanence of digital objects becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy when a haphazard approach or funding opportunity prevails over a solid foundation with workflows based on FAIR and CARE principles, accessibility, sound research, data management. So simply put, there's a greater chance that an object will survive if created in an open form amongst a shared community of research practitioners and ideally with a stable URI or ADOI. So this is also at the heart of the persistent how to evaluate a digital humanist for tenure debate. When a digital humanities website, when is it not a digital humanities website? When it fails to build fair content. A short-term website for news or for short-term project is not the same as a serious digital humanities endeavor with sharing and sustainability as core values, one in marketing, the other knowledge creation. So the lessons we can learn from CARE are that it's focused on the long term. It's people-centric. And this means building in relationships with people from the start, with the idea that we're at the long-term, longer vision of what needs to be done before we even start collecting research data. It considers the collective benefit, meaning that the data ecosystem is designed so that the community benefits, the authority of the community itself, rights and interests of especially Indigenous communities, that they're respected and given the authority to control that data. The responsibility then is on the researcher to share how it's used for self-determination and for collective benefit. The ethics then is involved in Indigenous people's rights as well as being a main concern throughout the research in the ecosystem as well. So then we get engaged commitments with communities. We start to build upon openness. We start to be truly open and engaged, and we have a long way to go. And the theory could also be applied beyond Indigenous communities to others dealing with sensitive data. And so far, since 2021, a lot of work has been done in this area, but it's really starting to show the benefits of being very composed about your research, about how you're actually going to collect it and how you're going to analyze it and then use it later on and then share it. So what needs to happen? I believe many scholars have sought to coalesce projects in the digital humanities and share practice and insight. Discussing the now retired Project Bamboo, a cyber infrastructure initiative for the arts and humanities, Quinn Dombrowski explained that Bamboo brought together scholars, librarians, technologists at a crucial moment in the emergence of digital humanities. Conversations that ensued may not have been what the program staff expected, but they led to relationships, ideas, and plans that have blossomed in the years that followed, even as Bamboo itself struggled to find a path forward. Writing in 2014, Dombrowski was hopeful for the future, for the growth of large-scale collaborative efforts in initiatives and infrastructure that would address shared technical needs of the community. And sadly, many of these projects have attempted to realize such hopes. They haven't survived, and now they are subject to jibe of being ephemeral and not a monograph. It was this vision of the web as a shared knowledge environment that prompted Tim Berners-Lee's information management, a proposal in 1989, born of a desire to communicate expert knowledge. However, directories or platforms that achieve this scholarly communication for cultural heritage, for symphonies, for paintings, for sculpture, for installations, for large-scale cultural heritage buildings and landscapes, they are difficult to build, they're difficult to fund, and they're difficult to maintain. There's been many of these false infrastructure launches in the US, from Project Bamboo to DIRT. Dombrowski and others have grappled with the difficult decisions of the fallout of what's called the directory paradox, where the digital humanities community's praise of directories is wildly incommensurate with interest and resources available for sustaining them. Dombrowski's Cowboys and Consortia talk for Daraya Beyond Europe explores that dichotomy in the solo maverick builder and the sustainability capacity of consortia without a long-term home. Theirs is a prescient reflection that a macrocosm of the dichotomies at play between the digital project within the infrastructure and the scholar within the traditional discipline. How may a cowboy's work of building an infrastructure survive to be sustained within a long-term consortium solution? What might work as a persistent, integrated research infrastructure do for the scholarly community and society? So I'm just going to skip ahead and just talking into, I suppose, the conclusion. Hope does remain, and we think about these false infrastructure dawns and successes and losses along the way. But we still have integrated examples of European research infrastructure consortia, includes the digital research infrastructure for the arts and humanities in Europe. Daraya EU, which proffers a holistic suite of solutions. These include APIs, discovery portals, training, national cultural heritage aggregators, standardization tools, data repositories, analysis and enrichment, amongst a long list. Daraya is building itself into a uniquely transdisciplinary international, and sustainable infrastructure for DH activities. This comprehensive vision includes European research infrastructure for heritage science that similarly engages with open agenda and promotes sharing within the field of cultural heritage. It builds on decades of work that created a network of scholarship in all sorts of different areas. Intrinsic to many of these projects were open concepts around linked open data ecosystems via semantic technologies of organic growth instead of the static databases of previous scholarly instances, positing a viable open future. So when you do look back at these evolutions, it's been improving, but in different ways. Cultural heritage community as a whole has more than embraced this paradigm shift, and exemplary institutions include the Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands with its totally open data policy. So these ideas of survival and opportunity are replicated globally and locally as traditional computer centers and universities. And funding bodies are trapped in old project models that militate against innovative forms of open sharing of cultural heritage in more sustainable ways. Collaboration to leverage change is possible. Multi-layered scholarship of many dimensions exists as our communities have gathered together over decades, many with shared principles of excellent scholarship to communicate expert knowledge rendered in ever newly emerging digital representations. The privileging and using of principles such as FAIR and CARA within our knowledge in a multiplicity of forms, it enriches our shared humanity, our songs and our stories, our immersive experiences that enable meaning making and understanding. And those of us in a position to further this enrichment must advocate for research and education practices, encouraging innovation, caring and thinking beyond the page, making evident the possibilities for excellent scholarship and excellent science inherent in representations of knowledge work. Okay, Margaret, thank you.
Thank you very much, Pádraig. That was great, really enjoyable and very informative. And it's great to see you getting lots of rounds of applause. We like that, considering we're all virtual. It's much more complicated than I initially realised. So now I'm going to pass you to Jane Smith, who's going to manage the questions. Jane, are there any questions?
There isn't anything in the chat at the moment. I've got a question if you want me to start off, but okay. No one's out there. So I have two questions. Have you seen the proportion of budget in funding applications rising over time? Are you involved with those? Is it actually happening? Are people managing to put their money where their mouth is, and are funders going for it?
Yeah, I suppose I could speak for humanities mostly. One of the most interesting things I didn't mention there actually was the Digital Humanities Observatory. A lot of people here might remember when that folded back in the early 2010s. And I was in King's College in London at the time, and I was actually this devastating feeling of like they're getting rid of this really important infrastructure in Ireland, and the digital humanities, is being stymied by it. But then when the DRI came along and it finally has permanent funding, it made me feel like that finally, okay, the money is being put where it should be put for long-term sustainability. And I think we need way more of that. We see so many research projects that are funded and, for a couple of years, again, it goes back to Project Bamboo and Dombrowski's call for we need some more permanent digital infrastructure. We've got libraries that have books. We need digital infrastructure that can hold data properly for long term and not be unsure whether it's going to be there for long term or not. But I'm still not fully convinced. And even as a data steward, moving from digital humanities into data stewardship, you see a lot more of funding proposals and a lot more of the rules that are set along the way. So it's quite interesting to see how it's still evolving, but it still hasn't got to a point where, let's say, a digital humanist would be comfortable with a place where they could put their data, for example.
For sure. Daria was in Galway yesterday, but of course we were here, so I will catch up with whatever they said. Yeah. And then let's see. Somebody has asked, can you say a bit more about how the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam shares their data and how that works, please?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was at a DRI conference there 2 years ago, and it was really interesting hearing the keynote a bit more in depth about how it works at the Rijksmuseum. Basically, data can be made as open as possible and then as closed as necessary. But in the Rijksmuseum, they're erring more on the really open side. They did a lot of work with linked data over the years. And I remember joining this space back in 2007 and being at conferences in the EU where they were really the ones that were leading the pack on semantic technologies. Those semantic technologies describing the data were critical at that time, and they became way more important along the way. You'll see the success of that in the Europeana project, Europeana.eu. Really interesting work that's been done over the years. But I think the problem that we've had with things like linked data is that they haven't been able to convince the public in some ways, because you end up with these really complicated ontologies, and you also have complicated infrastructure to try and set up. If you're not into that area, you don't really know about it. It's very hard to tell people how to use Sparkle queries. Um, so I find that over the years, it's been really interesting to see how the Rijksmuseum has worked with that, developed through that, and then has remained really steadfastly close to the principles of FAIR all the way through.
Cool. Thank you. My other question, I am going to ask it. What about unfunded projects? If you don't have any budget to begin with, how can you save what you're doing? Like, how do people ever get a leg up anywhere? Like,
Yeah, and I love that question because it's, I haven't mentioned care in the question and answers yet, but care really kind of talks about moving out towards communities outside of the institutions. And we can all sit around in institutions and talk about this stuff, but it's actually people who are out there in the communities. How do they even get a chance to get a leg up on any of this stuff at all and share in knowledge sharing, really? And I think one of the shining lights for me actually is where the DRI has these community project schemes where communities across the country have the chance to be able to share their knowledge on a platform that is permanent. And it's, years ago, you might create a WordPress website or you might create an Amica website, and you could store your information and your digital objects up there. And then it would cost you, an arm and a leg to hold on to it. Something would break and you'd have to get someone to fix it. And we're kind of moving into a more well-supported environment, I think, when you have something like the DRI and access to somewhere like that, where you can actually save it and have it properly preserved rather than just upload it to the internet.
fab. I think that actually takes us right into James, and I'll hand back to Donna.
Thank you.
But thanks,
Thank you,
Pádraig.
Pádraig. That's great, and good luck today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Okay, so our next speaker, I'm delighted to announce, is Dr. James Brunton, Assistant Professor and Programme Chair of the BA in Psychology and in DCU. His talk today is about the Engage project, and it's developing a national public engagement and open research roadmap through extensive consultation and co-creation activities with diverse sectoral stakeholders. The project is a joint initiative between DCU, TCD, and is funded by NORF, the National Open Research Forum. This presentation will consider how we can engage the public in open research, including themes of public engagement, citizen science, participatory methods, and the democratization of science. So I shall hand over to you, James. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Donna, and thanks everyone for coming along today and listening to this talk. Let me get all my bits going. Sure, the introduction's done half the work for me there. Um, so yeah, I want to talk to you about the Engaged project. It originates from an open research fund from in 2023 that Ireland's National Open Research Forum, NORF, put out. And this was related to the strand where NORF had picked or had chosen 5 areas of prioritization, and they were asking for kind of bids or tenders for people to come in and investigate and do the work that they wanted to do. So it was around incentivizing open research practices in Ireland, public engagement in open research, mapping national open research infrastructure, national research data management framework, creating that, and looking at an institutional open access policies and rights retention. So we were obviously me and TCD both went for the public engagement and open research, and we were both proposing to do such similar things. A suggestion was made that we come together. So it's a joint initiative between TCD and DCU. So it's myself and Professor Johanna Ivers kind of leading the project, but it's obviously relies on a wider team. So there's also Dr. Louise Hopper from DCU. Dr. Autumn Brown the amazing researcher, postdoctoral researcher on the project. Michael Foley, who's the Civic Engagement and Social Innovation Manager for Trinity. Kathy-Ann Kelly's our project manager, and then Tracy Jane Cassidy has been doing amazing work she's our engagement lead. Um, so what is it exactly? So what we were tasked to do is ultimately produce a roadmap on how Ireland can move forward, engaging the public with science, or engaging the public with open science, or engaging the public with open science. So what the project was trying to do was build up a network, engage with lots of people, different stakeholder groups, lots of people across Ireland, in order to inform this roadmap. So that's what we've been doing over the last year. And this I put this in, not that I think I'm preaching to the converted, like putting a slide like this up at this kind of event, but this is a slide that we used in lots of our workshops or events, and we were always just trying to make the point, because some people are, they're attracted to come along to an event about open research, but for them open research might be one thing. Their interest might be, let's get more open access publications out there. For somebody else it might be about open source software. We were just trying to make always push it that, like, we're talking about all of it. We're talking about a very broad, inclusive definition of open research. We're looking at lots of different things, and we always tried to keep to that as we went through the work that we did. So again, like I was saying, we were trying to engage people from a lot of different groupings, communities, stakeholder groups, what have you. And the other thing was, we were, as well as trying to do the work that we had to do, we also tried to build a bit of a movement. And that's really where Tracy Jane, as the engagement lead, came in. We tried to establish a kind of social media presence mainly through LinkedIn and Blue Sky. And you can see there we've got like over 10,000 Blue Sky followers, less than 1,000 LinkedIn followers. Maybe I should check that. Maybe it's gone up. But we try to create something a bit bigger than just the core project activities, because again, spoiler alert, but the project is now coming to an end. We're going to launch the roadmap in the next month. But the project will end then, but this can't end. It's a roadmap. It's going to, the rollout of the roadmap, or the continuation of these kinds of efforts, will rely on communities of people wanting to push these activities. We'll get. Do you know what? I'm going to skip over the workshops. We'll get onto that. So starting at the start of 2025, the process that we went through was, we initially Dr. Autumn Brown did an evidence review, looked at kind of national and international best practice, existing practice, what lessons could we learn, good or bad, out there. The evidence review then informed how we set up a series of collective workshops that ran between May and October. Um, Basically, like, I always, whenever I say this, it sounds like an alien attack or something, but like, sucking up all the knowledge, like trying to find out, like, what do people want? What do people think? What's happening out there? What do we need to take into account in building this kind of roadmap? The last workshop was in October, and then since October, the roadmap has been in development. It is currently a draft 3 state, and we'll be finalizing it over the next couple of weeks, and launching it next month and doing some dissemination events then after it's launched. So coming back to the evidence review, the evidence review mainly it looked at what's happening in Ireland already, what's happening in the UK, what's happening in other EU countries, and what's happening in the US. It was centered around a couple of key themes. So, what open research and public engagement goals already exist out there in different countries? What key infrastructure or investments or examples of best practice can we see when we look at different projects, different national initiatives? If you look elsewhere, what existing training and skills development supports exist, or what could we model on in Ireland? And then what is the link? What are the existing linkages between engaged research, open research efforts, and equity, diversity, and inclusion principles? Um, so if I just give like some examples of some of the things that came out in the evidence review, it's really this doesn't speak to the evidence review really, but it's just picking out the kinds of things we were looking at. So looking at the Netherlands, they have a national program of open science, which brought together universities, the Dutch Research Council, the National Library, and other major organizations to drive a structural shift. And that you can see that the work done in the Netherlands has resulted in a very healthy amount of peer-reviewed articles being openly accessible. That you can see that where these national initiatives are set up, where they have firm targets, where there is supporting infrastructure, you do get the results that you're looking for. In Sweden, the Swedish Research Council now requires that grant-funded publications be made freely and immediately accessible upon publication under a CC BY license. And this is coupled with national scale publisher negotiations and a broader open science agenda. So again, you can see there where clear licensing and coordination is put in place, this can fundamentally shift publishing practice while recognizing that implementation remains a work in progress. They're still engaging with publishers. It's not like they've completely moved past that. And then in France, the Plan National pour la Science Ouverte positions open research as a pillar of research policy backed by state investment and institutional coordination. The plan expands beyond publications to include open data, open software, citizen science, and research evaluation reforms supported by these national platforms. It prioritizes training and capacity building for early career researchers and embeds open science skills development across principles, creating a culture of openness from the ground up. So again, this approach emphasizes sovereignty, inclusivity, sustainability, showing how a coordinated national strategy can make openness a shared social and scientific responsibility. And again, some of the, we're sneaking in some of the big themes into these examples, like capacity building, training for researchers, but especially early career researchers, a very strong thing that came out across the whole project. So that then informed the structure of the 8 collective workshops across 5 topic areas that happened between May and in October. So the first one was kind of scene setting. It was like trying to say to people, where are we trying to go? If we look at 2030, what would be a good future? What should we have achieved? What would the landscape look like if we had achieved what we want to achieve? If we were in a state where open research was fully realized. The second workshop looked at training. What training would we need? What barriers are there to training and capacity building? The third workshop looked at infrastructure. What infrastructure would need to be out there for people to be engaging in open research, engaging with the public, and vice versa. Yeah, well, and for the public to be engaging in research. And the fourth one looked at inclusion, diversity, equity, and the link with open research and public engagement. And the fifth one was kind of as the roadmap, the early versions of the roadmap started to come together. How were we doing? How was our driving? Kind of was the final workshop, really kind of starting to kick the tires on what was coming together. In terms of with the total numbers of attendees across all the workshops was 155. 54% of those attended online, 46% attended in person. And you can see some of the breakdown there. We had like 34% were academics or researchers from HEIs, 21% from charities or NGOs, 19% were professional staff from HEIs, 11% civil or public servants, 6% kind of coming from citizen science groups, 5% who describe themselves as advocates or activists, 3% from other research contexts, and 1% from business and industry. The workshops were just really valuable events. There was they produced a lot of rich discussion between people coming from different backgrounds, coming from different stakeholder groups. And we used a lot of different data collection techniques. So we had some recorded discussion. We did a lot of different workshop activities, and we recorded the outputs of those workshop activities. So if people were in the infrastructure workshop, they had some fake money, and it was like we had to look at all the different. Well, first of all, we kind of imagined what the different areas were. We defined the different areas that we as a group saw as needing funding, and then we had to prioritize where we would put the funding, and we kind of recorded that by taking photos and keeping the actual artifacts from the workshop activity. One of the main ways of collecting data was through hands-on zine creation. So we created these mini magazines, and this was a great leveler because, again, it's like someone saying put your idea in tweet length, or tweets don't exist anymore, but when you have to be concise, when you have to sum up what you want to communicate, let's say through a small paper magazine like this, you really had to think about what were the key messages you wanted to put out. And that made it feasible also to collect and analyze data from such a big group of people. If we had interviewed everyone for an hour, we'd still be transcribing data probably. Also, the hands-on nature of this is actually, it's pretty nice. It was very scary, and I hadn't done this kind of creative data production, data collection technique before, but it's very creative, but it's very powerful at the same time. It's a specialism of Dr. Autumn Brown, so I think that's why where we got it from. So what has emerged? What are the kinds of things that we have found? In summary, these are the 5 main areas that are going to be at the heart of the roadmap that's going to be launched next month. But I will say the following slides are more from the early versions from the autumn. So what I'll be showing you now is definitely in the ballpark of what you will see in the roadmap next month, but it's not precise. It's not the final version, if you like. So the first Yeah, so the first one is all about the overall research ecosystem and the interface between research and communities, different publics. So it's really about, can we get to a point where research is accessible to the public? Can communities get the research that they need to, advocate, for the things that that community wants to advocate for? Um, uh, are the systems that hold the research, are they accessible, but also do they seem trustworthy? Um, and then what is the overall link between the public, or what is the link between researchers and the public? Is that working well? Um, and they like now again, these are I would say these are very loose. I almost don't want to speak to them, but like still, these are a flavor of kind of what by 2030, if we were to have achieved if we were to achieve that, what kind of goals, would we have achieved? Um, I'm not going to read through them. I'll just let you look at them for a second. But again, you see these things about, these from the themes earlier. What training in public communication would researchers get? And again, that then speaks to, how would that training be acknowledged in workload? How would that training be acknowledged in hiring or promotion or those kinds of things? Is this valued, or is it just extra work? If it's just extra work, this is not going to work into the future. Um, the next one was focused on addressing power imbalances within the research public's interface, and how to support research that happens in the community. So again, a big thing that constantly came up in the workshops was, researchers engage with the community. The researchers are paid to be there. The community has to volunteer their time. And it's all bureaucratic, or, it's because, oh, we can't contract them, or it'll mess up somebody's, social welfare. But like, these are understandable problems that have existed for a long time. We need solutions where people can be compensated for their time without it just breaking the system. We need a proper system for this. We need better routes or channels where we can have collaborative relationships, whether it's researchers engaging in the research that they're doing and involving the community, or community researchers being supported to engage in research. Um, and again, here's some of the goals that we kind of are in the ballpark of the goals that we're putting along with those. Community research networks, guidance on co-authorship practices, ethical community collaboration, how to support non-HEI type organizations in building up their research capacity. Yeah, having these ways of fairly compensating people in the community to engage in research projects. The third one is focused on how to support those in communities to obtain knowledge, skills, and competencies in research. So understanding it, doing it. So this is linking more to the ideas of kind of citizen science, the role of like science research literacy in education in the different levels. Yeah, and here's some of the goals that come along with that. So you can see how this becomes very meta. When you really start talking to people, well, what are the barriers? It's some major national level stuff. And again, I suppose we are trying to temper that in the final roadmap, and not say, well, we need a massive national citizen science. There are some things that are bigger than the remit of the project, but we definitely point to some of these things. Um, because again, like the questions that you run into is, if people in the community are supported to do research, how are they going to do certain things? Again, data stewardship is so complex at times. How are people in the community going to know how to do that? Um, So that yeah, the fourth kind of area was focused on the infrastructure through which people can learn about research data repositories and similar, and how these work better to engage the public in research. So again, I was thinking when Pádraig was talking, I was like, yeah, this is all you see the same themes coming up over and over again. Can the public use these systems that even already exist? Are they usable, or are they kind of archaic, or extremely hard to engage with? Do the different systems that are out there already speak to one another? Are the new systems that are being developed, are they going to speak to the old systems? We all need, but the public need, communities need systems that are genuinely usable. Um, and they have to be reliable, they have to be interoperable. Um, but then we also have to keep an eye on the fact that when we put things out into the public, they might be, or they can be, co-opted by hostile actors who might use them to detract from the public good as opposed to add to the public good. So again, some of the loose goals here, that we should be looking at what repositories we already have, how those are going to connect up, how those connect with government systems, how those are going to connect up with European open science infrastructure. It's those kinds of goals. And finally, then the fifth one is focused on public engagement in research governance, shaping research priorities, etc. So this is kind of about how do we engage the public, how do we engage communities and bring them in for the actual setting of research priorities onto the governance of research projects. So this is looking at participatory governance, uh, having some connection, some solidified connection to community identified priorities for research work. And we'll just move on to some of the goals we were thinking about there. Sort of an annual fund for community-led research, community research evaluatory systems. How do we bring in civil society and setting national research agendas? Looking at community representation on funding boards. Now you'd have to, again, it's like you have to wait and see how this comes out exactly eventually. So what next? Next month we are launching. We will launch the roadmap and we will have some dissemination events. So I would say watch our social media channels to see exactly when and where those are happening. But definitely, yeah, one's going to be in DCU and one will be in Galway, which has been discussed in the last while. So thank you very much for listening to me go on about this project.
Thank you very much, James. That was really interesting, challenging. It's very much the democratization of knowledge, I think, is the aim, which was really good. I'm going to pass back to our questionnaire manager, Jem. Jem, I'll hand over to you. Thanks.
All right, there's nothing in the chat at the moment. I'll start from the end. I know that HRB anyway has like lay readers for their ethics applications, but getting reviewers for their funding applications is getting really difficult. I was talking to someone from the HRB. So like they're really into PPI and they really want the public to be involved in shaping it, but getting people to actually come on board, like it's about incentives. I think you're totally right that finding some way to have a recognized pathway to pay people in cash for their time without falling afoul of procurement issues is a really important thing for the whole country.
Yeah, I mean this is one of those projects that when these conversations start happening, just so many elephants are surfaced, so many elephants become visible so that, that comes up, just like the horrific nature of the publication process and how hard it can be to publish open access. And you've got examples where, a family with a particular advocacy interest because of, medical things going on in that family, and They advocate, they raise money for the research to happen. The research happens, and then it gets published in a closed journal that they can't access. It's just like these make no sense, you know. And then at the same time, you know, what are some of the immediate, well, in order to make X or Y happen, we would need research practice to change. So we need researchers to do more things. That's all work. We already exist in a system where the work is barely happening because of workload capacity issues and associated cultures around, you know, what is incentivized, what's not incentivized. It's like none of this is going to work unless you unravel some of that. But I mean, then you start going, oh God, can we bite off that? We can't. Can we do that? You know, but you know, so some of this requires some serious looking at, you know, some of the existing setup. Sorry, I'm rambling.
Rachel Iredell has put in a link. Did you want to unmute? Great.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm head of public engagement at Research Ireland, as the kind of the national funder, shall we say, for research and innovation. I put in a link to an event we're hosting in May of this year, where we're trying to involve anybody, academic, practitioner, policymaker who's interested in public engagement, help us shape the landscape a bit better on a national level about what we should fund in this space and what we should do as a community of practice. And we really want to use our position as being able to leverage lots of people in lots of different institutions and kind of across the whole ecosystem. So if anybody's interested, please come along to that. I see Angela has put a note about PPI payments. We do feel as well we should have a national position on that. So it is free. It's available to all. If anybody needs more details, they can reach out to me. But I'd hope to see a lot of people from this group joining us on the 7th of May.
Fabulous.
Thanks,
I will put that link in the email that we send out to everybody. That's
super. Thank you.
So just to answer Bridie's question, those were just three very brief examples. The evidence review did capture other types of practices, and you know, so there was a whole range of practices that were more focused on citizen science, democratizing knowledge, you know, working in communities. You know, there was a lot of detail in the evidence review on public engagement in science initiatives that were more focused on DEI themes as opposed to open publishing or like that end of things. Those are just three examples that highlighted some of the themes. There was more in the evidence review. One thing that was interesting there, and it's always a key point to make, is some of those DEI examples came from America, and as the evidence review was being written, that entire infrastructure was being demolished. And the evidence review was delayed because Autumn ended up having to try and save documents off the internet that were disappearing day by day. So I suppose one thing is, as we're engaging in all this kind of work, never forget that things can go backwards. And if these initiatives are shallow, if the funding is temporary, if it's something that at the turn of a political mood change can just be kind of peeled off, and it's like, well, we can't afford to do that anymore. Let's just focus on the fundamentals or something. You know, then the progress that we make can be eroded. You know, I didn't want to finish on such a bum note. Sorry.
Yeah. And Angela said PPI comes up again and again, and I see that you're from Queen's, so the different context between what covers UK law versus Irish law, I don't know if we could. Well, I used to work in the UK and it wasn't great in the UK either, so it's clearly not solved yet, but everybody wants it to happen, so there must be some kind of way.
Okay.
Do you want to speak, Angela, or should we move on?
Maybe we'll continue the discussion after, because I should have left the questions to the end. My apologies. I've already apologized to Thérèse. Our next speaker is Dr. Thérèse McDonnell, a research fellow at UCD. She's a health economist with expertise in collaborative interdisciplinary research and has led on a body of applied qualitative research, including policy evaluation and decision making. Thérèse is going to talk to us today about patient and public involvement in the design and conduct of research, engaging with the minority community, and we're really looking forward to this talk. Thank you very much. Thérèse.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you can see my slides there now. Okay, that's great. Yeah, good morning. I'm delighted to be part of this this week, and thank you to Pádraig and James for their very interesting presentations. I'm hoping I'll be able to pick up on a couple of points in my presentation. I'm going to talk to you about a piece of work that we conducted in 2024. And it was part of a larger project that my colleagues and I in UCD were engaged with a number of different collaborators, and we worked with a lot of different stakeholders. So I'm going to maybe give you a little bit of an introduction to the overall project, and then I'm going to focus specifically on the work that we did with working with 8 wonderful women from the minority a minority community, the Roma community. So let's make sure that here we go. So just checking that it is moving, and you can see my next slide. Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you about is captured in 2 publications, open access publications, that were published over the summer in Health Expectations. And in particular, the first paper there details the strategy that we employed to engage with this community. So that'll kind of be the backbone of my presentation today. But a lot of really interesting findings came out of this research, which I unfortunately won't have time to talk about today, and it's out of scope really anyway. But if you are interested, please do look at our second paper there, because that is kind of the voice of the women that we spoke to. That's what they told us. And so understanding a minority group's experience of access and quality in maternity services. So at the outset, I really wanted to thank the women who engaged with us in this research, who were brutally honest and very full of humor, but delighted to be listened to. I will definitely say that. And also just to acknowledge that the funding came from the HSE through the National Quality and Patient Safety Directorate. So just to kind of give you a background, the project was the QS Signals project, and going back a couple of years ago, the HSE began to look at introducing a national system of measuring quality and safety. So this was a big kind of IT project, and as part of that, we were brought in to do research components for the project. So specifically, I was looking at how to measure quality and safety in the health service. Now, the UCD team was led by Professor Eilish McAuliffe, and my colleagues Jaspreet and Boucher were also part of this research. So obviously the HSE is big. So the way they approach these projects is they do what's called a proof of concept first. So they partnered with the maternity services, and in particular the National Women and Infants Health Programme. And their head of research there is Laine McMahon. And in the research that I'm going to talk to you about specifically, the whole collaboration was obviously between ourselves in UCD, the National Quality and Safety Directorate within the HSE, and the National Women and Infants Health Programme, who are part of the delivery of care to women, to pregnant women and young babies. But the PPI component was the Corja, who are an organisation I'll tell you more about shortly, were again the backbone of that part there. And Mariana, Emily, Danut, and Carmen were the key people there. So just to acknowledge everybody's contribution to this co-design piece of research. So in actually trying to work out how to measure quality in the health service, we had a number of stakeholders. So we conducted firstly a lot of workshops and interviews and surveys with the clinicians. So these are obstetricians, they're pharmacists, they're general practitioners, they're midwives. I think there was about neonatal care specialists, etc. So we did a lot of what became quite technical workshops with these with these clinicians. And we were at the outset, the brief was to engage the public and to have PPI representation in these workshops. But from the outset, it was very evident to us that that was not going to be a goer, because these are very technical discussions. They were very long. Language was used that, you know, the average person, I can tell you, I was certainly doing a lot of Googling, it would have been quite a barrier to engagement for many people if they were seen to be, their role was to represent the women who were using the service. So what we did was we basically concluded a lot of that work, and then we went to a service user panel. Now, again, because a lot of it was technical, we had to get what we called kind of an expert service user panel. So these were service users or advocates, but they had clinical type backgrounds. So say one was a midwife, one was a public health doctor. So they were acting on behalf of the public, and they were looking at, you know, these are the things that you're looking to measure. What have you thought about the following? Actually, I don't like the language and how you've presented this, etc. So they were giving very valuable feedback through workshops and through surveys. But we knew that we were missing a very critical voice, in particular the voice of minorities and voices, because minorities are all very distinct as people are. So we knew that they really couldn't be fairly integrated into the existing two streams of engagement that we had designed. So we felt quite strongly we needed to design something to hear about their experience of using the maternity services. So again, as I say, we were looking at the use of the maternity services throughout Ireland in public healthcare. So we kind of put on our thinking hats and collectively decided, okay, we need to engage with at least one minority community. And the question that we'd be posing to them is, you know, from their experience, are we able to capture what we've come up with? Will it capture their experience? And in particular, we were fully aware that many individuals from minority communities do not have favorable engagement with our public services. So there was no point having measures in place that actually just didn't actually capture that, so that we could, you know, ensure that improvements were brought into the delivery of care. So why include ethnic minority communities? Well, I'm speaking to people who know about this here, but the reality is for people from these communities is that very many of them come from high levels of poverty. They have low levels of education. Poor nutrition is not uncommon. They live in disadvantaged neighborhoods. They have precarious housing situations, and they definitely experience racism. Very many of them do. And all of that leads to often very poor maternal and health outcomes. We decided that we wanted to, in particular, focus on the Roma community because, again, we were aware from the literature and because we were dealing with NWIP and the HSE, we had their lived experience of providing care to these women, and they knew that it was a very difficult engagement process for them. The Roma community are the most marginalized ethnic minority community in Europe. They have great difficulty in accessing healthcare, and they really do mistrust not just the health services, but public services often quite more broadly. They absolutely experience discrimination. They're afraid of the cost. They don't understand, for instance, that maternity care is free in Ireland. And there are clear language and literacy barriers. In particular, in the context of maternity services and working with pregnant women, they are quite distinct as a community from a cultural perspective because they do tend to marry young. And certainly everybody in the group that we dealt with, you know, they were in around 18 when they were married, and many were 15, 16 when they had their first child. So they also have a high number of children. And they have a very low utilization rate of antenatal services. And given that these are high-risk pregnancies because the women are young and they have a number of births, often back-to-back, you know, not availing of antenatal care, it's a very high-risk situation. Um, so we really wanted to try and reach out to these women and capture their experience, so that they had a voice, and then we could make sure that these sort of more academic exercise that we've done in getting these big list of measures, we could kind of cross-check and say, you know what, these do pick up, what their experience really is. But we also knew from the international literature that we're going to face a lot of barriers in engaging with this community. So the kind of barriers that we knew we would face into, and actually I will acknowledge that they were greater than we actually the literature even indicated. The literature actually under described the barriers, I think, in many ways. So how to engage with these women, and not just to recruit, but actually how to conduct the research with the community that many of whom do not speak English, many of whom do not read even their own language. Who are very marginalized and don't trust mainstream organizations. So we knew that the trust was a big issue. We were also very aware that there's a power imbalance. There is always concern, and to kind of move on to that research is done in a bubble and it's tokenistic. And we were very nervous about that because we really, we were in a very privileged position as a research team. We had policymakers as part of the collaboration. So we knew that this research could actually genuinely give these women a voice, because we had NWIP and we had the HSE as part of this engagement. Another big issue is, some members of these community may start with the engagement process, but for a variety of reasons they fall away. So we really wanted them to journey through the process with us. Resourcing to engage with any minority community where you have significant barriers. Going back to the issue of payment, it's such a thorny issue. But I will talk to you about what we did there. But we had to make a very strong case for why we felt that some money should be put behind the engagement process. And then the recruitment. How do you actually find the people who are going to be participating in this research with you? And as I said earlier, because we were dealing with low levels of literacy and language barriers, and we were dealing with what was often very clinical contexts, we had to be very, very careful that we designed an engagement strategy that took all of this into account. So when, as researchers do, we went to the international literature and we looked at how have other engagements worked with minority communities, we found patchy literature. We kind of struggled to find something that was similar to what we were trying to do. But we did find actually a very nice framework by Shahan and colleagues. And actually one of the co-authors is an Irish-based researcher, and they were dealing with engagement with the minority community in Australia. So they had this framework, and when we looked at it, we thought, that really could just be a roadmap for how we're going to design this engagement. So their first aim was to make sure that you invite the seldom heard voices to the research engagement. The second one is going back to funding, but so much else goes behind the resourcing. You need to meet their support needs, and resources need to be allocated to the process. And then finally, you need to enable the diversity of contributions in the whole co-design process from start to finish. So looking at some of the things that we specifically did in this engagement, the most important and the most successful thing that we did was to engage with Corja. And Corja are a community health development organization. So it goes back to James's, slides where he was saying how NGOs were part of the process. They are an NGO, and they have the trust of many members of the Roma community. So they have very long-standing connections through the Roma community. And one thing they do is two things that they do that are of great value is they have a helpline for these people, and they also offer education. And they also have what would be a peer-led community engagement. They actually employ members of the Roma community to help lead these engagements. So because of that, we were able to recruit 8 Roma women. And because of the pre-established connections between Corja and the Roma women who supported the engagements through being employed by Corja, we had very open, very honest discussions around what were absolutely sensitive topics. For instance, losing a child, difficulties in childbirth, disrespectful treatment while you're in care, etc. So in terms of meeting the support needs, I got some more on the next slide, so I'll just nod to some of these points here. We conducted 4 online workshops, and the online part of this was quite interesting. The online part or approach to our research actually worked brilliantly. And I think this is, again, perhaps one of those legacies of COVID, and it's a good legacy of COVID. When we spoke to the women about doing in-person engagement, they were not interested. They did not have time. They had so much else to do. But if they didn't have to commute somewhere, and they could just log on onto a laptop or a phone provided to them by Corja for this purpose, they were happy to engage. So the online workshops were very successful. Corja, because of their relationship with the women and the 2 Roma women who were employed by them, they would text them before the engagements, before the workshops, and definitely it helped to ensure that we had full attendance. Going back to James's point actually about power imbalance. We were very aware of that, and we were also very aware that because these women a lot of them are not turning up for antenatal care, there probably was an educational deficit as to what antenatal care is in Ireland, what the risks are in pregnancy, and the supports that you can get from the maternity services in here in Ireland. So we put a lot of work into actually designing an educational program that was delivered as part of these workshops. Translation interpretation was supported by the Roma community representatives, and everything that we did was designed with low literacy in mind, and I'll talk to that in a minute. Reimbursement did happen. We paid modest amounts to Corja to help them pay these women. Many of these women are so marginalised they don't actually qualify for social welfare. So if you can offer them something small to attend an educational course, you will get them to attend. If you offer them something small to share their opinion, they will share their opinion. And also we did a survey, and the survey was supported by an interpreter and a tutor from Corja. So because of that, the language, financial access, cultural and other support needs were met. And that optimized participation, and it really did help promote the discussion. The participants, we did obviously, ask for feedback from them. They really enjoyed the educational sessions, and we got full participation for every single workshop and every single survey. And then finally, in terms of the co-design, from the very beginning, when we approached Corja, they were very, very keen to be part of this. We had a number of meetings where we got their input on co-designing how we engage. We asked lots of questions. They gave lots of answers. They steered us in the right way to do this. And in particular, the 2 Roma women who were part of that were hugely helpful. And I will openly say that after the first workshop, I think it was clear we'd underestimated the extent of the literacy and language barriers that were ahead of us. So we had to make a lot of changes, or some changes. So yeah, workshop reviews were carried out directly afterwards, and we looked at what worked and what didn't. And also as part of this, they were part of the dissemination strategy. So all posters and presentations, and in particular, they were our co-authors on their paper, and they're not just co-authors in name, they absolutely review the paper. They gave us very strong feedback. So their voice is very much behind what is published. So we felt that we had addressed the power distribution imbalance. This could not have happened without them. And we felt that co-leadership and diverse contributions in the co-design process were enabled. Just very quickly, I'm going to be limited in time. We had 3 workshops initially scheduled, but because of the challenge of interpretation and translation, we did add a 4th. Largely, I say, because it took a lot longer to manage the translations. But also the women loved talking. They really were so forthcoming in their experiences. We built an educational component that was delivered by a public health consultant. We had to use slides with just pictures, no words. We provided a script to the translators in advance so that they could review it and check if they understood everything. The use of non-technical languages, I certainly learned after the first workshop, the kind of words that you would take for granted, that would be a challenge to them to understand. And obviously we were lucky enough to have translators from the Roma community. We worked with them in breakout rooms because these are sensitive topics. So they were in small groups and they were very forthcoming. So open discussion, translation support was critical. Cultural sensitivities were understood and respected. We were no judgment, and many participants knew each other, and that absolutely helped prompt discussions. We also did a survey that allowed us to capture background information and feedback. Again, we had tutor and translator support. We had to kind of be very careful again by language usage and consent. And we got a lot of very, very interesting and useful contextual information about their background. So kind of trying to wrap up now, the importance of engaging with an NGO organization cannot be understated. There's no way this research would have worked the way it did without the involvement of Corja. Because they employ members of the remote Roma community who support the research activities, it meant we had their trust. And also they're there providing daily supports to this community. So they're not just rocking up with no background. They will be supporting them, next week and the week after this particular piece of research had finished. The design of the engagement strategy and the delivery of the research was a partnership with Corja, the HSE, NWIP, and ourselves. We were kind of the facilitator behind that. And we talk about going out and doing community research. This is something of that nature, but again, having professional researchers meant that we were able to structure everything and sort of guide the process along. Corja identified the educational need, which we tried to address with these women. They also recruited the participants, they provided the technology, and supported workshop attendance and the translation. The tutor assistance was really invaluable in completing the surveys, and they're obviously shared the authorship of the publications, the open access publications. So it's just some of the findings actually were just each participant had between 2 to 6 children. The first child was born when they were between 15 and 18 years. All women face significant challenges due to low levels of education, language barriers, and precarious housing. None of them would have finished school, for instance. Most participants stated they had been treated well by the healthcare professionals they met in the Irish healthcare system. They were, even though they had lots of examples of things not going well, they were overall said that they were met with kindness by many staff members, which was nice to hear. They explained some of the reasons their community were reluctant to engage with services, thus providing a deeper understanding of what, from their perspective, constitutes quality in maternity services. So difficulty in communicating with healthcare professionals, lack of an interpreter when needed. They had more examples of when they needed an interpreter and didn't get one than the other way around. Some of them did not engage at all with maternity services and basically turned up for the baby to be delivered. Hesitancy in some in disclosing their Roma identity. A couple were extremely proud of it, but others were very reluctant to disclose it because they were afraid that they wouldn't be treated well. They didn't understand services that are available, and they thought they had to pay for everything, some of them. And they were very hesitant in discussing mental health. And that tends to be something of a cultural issue. So to conclude, the many barriers to this engagement were addressed by identifying and partnering with a wonderful organisation like Corja, with strong links to the community. It really did give us a very privileged access to the Roma community, so that they were able to share their advice. And I will say, once they had that platform, they didn't hold back. They were fantastic. So really making funding available to community partners to facilitate the engagement is an important mechanism to enable these seldom heard voices to engage in research. So, sorry, that was a bit of a bit over time. My apologies.
Yes, that was absolutely fantastic. So interesting. And I wish that we could have the rest of the morning. And likewise for James and Pádraig, it was just really interesting.